Hey folks, welcome to this very special edition of the Whitfield Report post-Super Bowl edition. Well, half post-Super Bowl edition anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm doing this episode in part because I did not do an episode on Saturday evening because the live streaming software that I usually use to broadcast YouTube is having issues again. My computer, simply put, ladies and gentlemen, just needs to be defragged and kind of cleaned up a bit because it's running slow. So that's my fault and I apologize, but I will be cleaning that up this week and getting the computer back in tip-top shape to stream again this coming weekend. So thank you for your patience with that, and I'll be back on YouTube as ASAP. With that in mind, I decided to do a special audio podcast on Monday for you guys, relating to the Super Bowl, and also the other half of this episode relates to Joe Rogan's interview with Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter. That was a requested topic that I discussed by some audience members this past week. So even though I didn't get to cover that on the live stream show on Saturday, I covered that a bit here as well, along with the Super Bowl. And basically, I think political correctness as a whole has ruined the NFL. Folks, I think it'll be a great show, and I hope you enjoy the program and the special edition episode right after these messages, of course. Greetings to you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this special edition of the Whitfield Report podcast. Yes, you're listening to a special Monday edition of the Whitfield Report, and I'm so glad to be able to join you this evening in the past, present, future hour, whenever you're listening. So first off, ladies and gentlemen, I just have to say, besides welcome to the show, I want to just say that this is a special Monday edition of the podcast. I rarely record episodes of the Whitfield Report on Monday. Usually on Mondays, if you subscribe to the podcast feed, you'll get the American Watchman Roundtable podcast. But because of the Super Bowl, which we'll be discussing this episode, or rather the lack of a Super Bowl, we canceled the podcast just because we figured that no one would really be watching the live stream on YouTube because of the Super Bowl. And, depending on what your take of the game is and how that turned out, we might be wrong. Also, this is a bonus podcast as well because there was no Saturday show for the Whitfield Report either. And that was entirely my fault, admittedly. Folks, I've been having some problems, admittedly, with the computer I use to stream the podcast. It's a 2011 Macintosh, so it's a few years old, and works pretty well, but it's just gotten really slow, so I'm going to need to defrag that here this week, and I'll also clean some old audio clips and video clips for the streaming thing, because I'm sure that's pretty full. I have everything backed up, and I will continue to back everything up. But I think I've just got to get it cleaned out, and then, by the time this coming Saturday rolls around, I promise the live stream will be back. So I am going to upload this audio podcast to YouTube, by the way, on Tuesday afternoon. So if you're watching this on YouTube, or rather watching the waveform on YouTube, greetings to you guys as well. And I'll be sure to have a video podcast this coming weekend, either way. Don't worry. Alright, folks, so we're going to talk a couple of things. I initially wanted to talk a little bit about Joe Rogan's interview / podcast with Jack Dorsey. So I'm going to cover that in this episode. But, since everyone is talking about the Super Bowl for Monday podcasts, and I am recording this on a Monday, it may show up on your feed on a Tuesday. That's the other thing. The podcast episodes have been being delayed for some people by a day or by a few hours. So even if I record an episode late Monday night like I am right now, sometimes it'll show up for people on Tuesday, but this is a Monday podcast. So, do with that what you will. Anyway, as I was saying, everyone is talking at the Super Bowl and podcast land, so I figured, what the hell, I might as well talk about the Super Bowl as well. Especially since I skipped the American Watchmen Roundtable to do so. And, wow, where to start? First off, let me just say that this had to be one of the most anticlimactic, slow, uninteresting, and boring Super Bowls that I've seen in quite a long time. The only reason I stuck around for all 4 quarters of the game was because, the only reason was because my neighborhood had their big yearly Super Bowl party where we all congregate at someone's house and watch the Super Bowl. So, of course, there was free food and free beer. So why the hell would I, turn that down? And believe me, that made watching the game tolerable. But overall, it was really forgettable. Neither team scored for the first half of the game, almost the entire first half. They didn't score at all for the first quarter. By the end of the second, I believe they were tied from what I remember. And, really, the Patriots, even though they won, they really didn't pick up momentum until the last few minutes of the fourth quarter. So, what can I say? The game was really just anticlimactic. So, I guess I will say congrats to the Patriots fans out there who won, but, at this point, the Patriots have gone to the Super Bowl, so many times that unless you're a diehard Patriots fan, it's really hard for, for other people to even really get excited for the Patriots anymore. And to be clear, I really didn't have a stake in this Super Bowl. As many of you know who listen to this program, I am a sixth-generation Colorado native, so I'm a diehard Broncos fan, dyed in the wool. I'd say my second favorite team is the Dallas Cowboys, mainly because of the cheerleaders, if I'm being honest. But Dallas did actually have a good season this year. But they didn't go to the Super Bowl either. So neither of my teams really made it to the Super Bowl. So I didn't really care, to be honest. And so I really didn't have a stake in the game. But with all that being said, I just found the game to be boring and whatnot as a whole. So thank God for food and alcohol at the party. So commercials. In terms of the Super Bowl advertisements, and this has been a critique of mine for the last few years, the Super Bowl advertisements, ladies and gentlemen, seem to be more and more forgettable each year. And I think that's because, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again, I don't think that the Super Bowl ads are as memorable, but I think that's also partially in part due to the internet, and more specifically due to platforms like YouTube, where we're so inundated with ads now anyway, right? Whether it be television, the internet, in-app advertisements, even podcast advertisements. We're just so inundated with ads now that really, even with the Super Bowl, I think, people are just, they're kind of getting fatigued and they're just passive, especially when you can look up a lot of these Super Bowl ads online on YouTube right after the fact now. You don't have to stay glued to your TV like you did, 10, 12 years ago. And I'm not knocking advertising during the Super Bowl. I'm not really knocking advertising at all, actually. As someone who advertises, who reads ads prior to the start of the audio podcast, who does ads, for this podcast, I get it. Okay, I get, the need for ads, for businesses to advertise. I get that for content creators like me, having ads on your podcast or your YouTube channel or whatever, I understand that that's a way to make money. So I get it. I'm not knocking, advertising as a whole. I'm just saying that we're so used to it now as a culture that really, I think people are just passive about the ads. And honestly, I think maybe it's just me, but the Super Bowl ads, for what they're paying, all these advertising, all these creative teams just aren't putting their best foot forward anymore for the Super Bowl ads. The only one that really stuck out to me, the only two that really stuck out to me was, of course, the Big Lebowski Stella Artois one, which, by the way, real quick tangent, I am slightly disappointed because a few weeks ago when that, teaser for that ad came out on Jeff Bridges' Twitter account, and, he was dressed as the dude. Everyone, including myself, thought that was going to be like a trailer, that was going to be like a trailer announcing a Big Lebowski sequel. Everyone fell for it, me included, so don't try and say that, I knew that was a Super Bowl ad, because no, everyone really up until like the last 2 or 3 days we all thought that was going to be a Big Lebowski trailer announcement. Which, believe me, I am kind of disappointed that we're not getting a Big Lebowski sequel, at least not yet. Knock on wood that happens. But at the same time, the Big Lebowski, I don't know, does it really need a sequel? I think one would be good, especially since it's one of my favorite movies. But at the same time, the Big Lebowski is a movie that can kind of stand on its own. So all I'm saying with that is, I'm disappointed, but not overly, surprised that it just turned out to be a Super Bowl ad. But, in terms of ads, it was one of the better ones at the Super Bowl. The other one that really stood out to me, although not for a good reason at all, was, they had that TurboTax commercial with the creepy robot baby, or, creepy robot child, whatever that was supposed to be. Now, that was effective advertising, but I'm not so sure that it was effective in the way that TurboTax wanted, because if there are two things that people hate, it's the idea of paying taxes, right? Okay, no one really likes paying taxes to begin with. And then, people are weirded out by the idea of, creepy android-like robots, especially now with, what we're seeing. So, creepy robots and paying taxes. I mean, yeah, it's definitely an attention getter, but maybe not. I think in this case it's having the opposite effect. Like no one I know is going out and buying TurboTax or signing up for the TurboTax service now because of this commercial. Okay, so the game, the game was less than good, objectively. The commercials were subpar and forgettable at best. And as far as the halftime show goes, another big stinker. And I've got to be honest, I haven't really been a fan of the Super Bowl halftime shows for quite a number of years now. And I'm going to sound real snobby, but, rap and hip-hop and all this new, pop, all these, sugar pop bands, as I call them, like Maroon 5 and like, Lady Gaga and Katy Perry. I'm sorry, I do not think of the Super Bowl when I think of them. When I think of the Super Bowl, I think of rock and roll, honestly. And yeah, that may be partially because I'm a rock and roll snob, but, rock and roll has like a good solid rock and roll will have like a really strong drive to it. Really raw, primal, get your body moving and start headbanging, just like in football. It's it's primal. It's really raw, and pop music. It's not all bad, but it doesn't have that same appeal. I don't feel like going out and throwing a ball around after listening to Maroon 5. I just don't. Apart from my, albeit objective look at how I think halftime shows should be rock and roll music exclusively, even though I can't say Maroon 5's performance was that good, and, when those, other R&B / hip-hop artists came on, like, first, I really didn't even know who they were. I guess the one guy made that song, like, I Like the Way You Move, which isn't a bad song per se, but again, doesn't really belong in the Super Bowl. So, all in all, I would say that this Super Bowl was a C- for me personally. And I'm not the one who feels this way. What's interesting to me is a lot of people were not lost interest in last night's game, it seemed. And this seems to kind of be a trend in, I guess, NFL football in particular. People just aren't watching the game anymore like they used to. Part of it just has to be, I guess the NFL is losing its luster, and that may be because of time, but also it's because of stuff like being overly inundated with political correctness now, and that whole kneeling thing, which, again, anyone who listens to this podcast probably knows my politics, but objectively, can we at least leave the politics out of pro football? I think that there is a time and place to discuss police brutality. I think there is a time and a place for players to voice their opinions about political issues off the field. I don't think the game has to be the only has to be the place for them to do it. Now, am I saying that they don't have a right to free speech? Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that I think for the most part we should keep the game non-political. This is another little rant of mine, and this may be the most sexist quote-unquote thing I've said on the podcast, so bear with me. And be warned too. But I feel as if the NFL has also become chickified a bit, partially because of the whole Maroon 5 pop band thing. Like, most guys I know are not into Maroon 5. They're hardcore rockers like I am, and so most guys prefer rock music. We've had pop artists for the last few years. The shows haven't been as memorable, so change that. There's also a big push by the political correctness crowd, speaking of those folks, to get rid of NFL cheerleaders. Specifically, there's been a big hoopla from the feminist wing for them to get for the NFL to get rid of the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders because their uniforms are quote unquote too exposing, and that would be all fine and good if a lot of these dancers in music videos and whatnot that these same feminists love to go on and on about how much they love. They're just as suggestive as the cheerleaders, if not more so than some of these cheerleaders. So there's clearly double standard there. A lot of these feminists just hate NFL cheerleaders because they appeal to the men, and that whole part. And the cheerleaders, if you're complaining about the NFL cheerleaders in comparison to other things out there on the internet, the NFL cheerleaders really aren't even that risque in comparison to some of these other dancers, or, albeit a lot of these feminists are also into like erotic porn now and whatnot with the whole 50 Shades of Grey thing. So, the whole argument that cheerleaders are sexist in the NFL, that whole argument doesn't really hold a candle for me. And, thankfully, the NFL hasn't caved on that. But I'm telling you, if they continue to cave on these, political correctness things, and if they do get rid of cheerleaders, I think a lot of the core audience of the NFL, which again is mainly men, including myself, I think we may end up leaving. Vince McMahon has said that he wants to bring back the Extreme Football League, and at this point, with all of this politically correct stuff in the NFL, I am more than I'm more than willing to say, go for it, Vince. If there's a market for it, go for it. So, all in all, that's just my little NFL rant, as it were, / rant on the Super Bowl. So, you're welcome. Now, on to the subject of Joe Rogan interviewing Jack Dorsey. I said on Sunday morning that I had been listening to the podcast. If you caught my Periscope from Sunday morning, I was in the middle of listening to the podcast, and I said I would have my opinions. So a lot of people are miffed with Joe Rogan right now because he had Jack Dorsey on his podcast, and Jack Dorsey is the CEO of Twitter and at the moment a very controversial figure. Many on the right, myself included, feel that many conservatives have been censored and banned on the platform for unfair and vague reasons, as we are on many other platforms. Now, my Twitter account is still intact. I've not gotten struck down yet. I did get like a temporary ban, like, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, but since then, it's been, everything's been pretty good. So the big controversy is many people feel that Rogan didn't grill Jack Dorsey on the issue of censorship enough. And this wasn't just conservatives who felt this way. These were also some liberals as well who felt that Joe was going a little too soft on Jack. Now, I listened to the first... I listened to the entire episode of the podcast, and judging from some people's comments online, it's clear that some of them didn't listen to the podcast at all, and just got upset that Rogan even had Jack Dorsey on, which, that's their prerogative to have that opinion and to get mad because, it's a free country. But, it's clear that some people didn't even listen to the podcast. Then, obviously, there were people who listened to the podcast, but they only listened part of the way through because they missed other details. And then there were people like me who listened or watched the full 2-hour podcast. And there were people who were still mad about Rogan having Jack Dorsey on. Okay? Now, whichever camp you're in, I understand. Here's my take. I'm not a big fan of Jack Dorsey. I do believe that he leans pretty far to the left. And I do believe that Twitter is biased against conservatives, or really anyone who is free speech and not far to the left. I definitely think that there is a censorship problem within Twitter. With that being said, a lot of people were complaining that Joe Rogan didn't grill Jack Dorsey enough on the censorship issue. Now, I've been listening to Rogan pretty regularly for the last 2 years. I wouldn't really say I'm like a diehard Joe Rogan fan, although, I do like some of his interview stylings and whatnot. And that's mainly what I admire about him is his hosting style and the way he interviews people. That's what he is. He's an interviewer. So like I said, a lot of people are upset that he didn't necessarily grill Jack Dorsey. But if you ever listen to his podcast, I really can't think of an instance where Joe has grilled anyone in the past. Really. In the sense of like a big confrontation. That's not really his style. His style of podcasting is more just a couple guys hanging out chatting. And obviously he's had some pretty influential people like Jack Dorsey and like Elon Musk. But, with that being said, his conversation style is pretty casual. And I think that's what draws a lot of people to his podcast. And that's why he is the number one podcaster. And I really didn't see him treating Jack Dorsey any differently. I really didn't see him. Going soft on Jack Dorsey per se. But I didn't see any instances of him going hard on Jack Dorsey or really going hardcore on anyone else in terms of guests. I mean, people on the right want to complain that he had Jack Dorsey on, but then, a few months ago, people were complaining that he had Ted Nugent on. And, I like Ted Nugent. I felt Rogan was pretty fair to Ted Nugent. Would I have liked Rogan to maybe, ask Jack about the censorship thing a little more? Yeah. But I'm not pissed at him for not doing so. So I know that I may be in the, minority camp here. I don't think it was his best interview he's done. I certainly think one of the best Joe Rogan interviews I've seen still has to be the Elon Musk one. Objectively, that was just fascinating. As far as Jack himself goes, again, this really doesn't change. This interview didn't really change anything for me about Jack. It's still pretty clear that he is pretty far to the left to me. Although he did say that he was raised in the Midwest with a Republican dad, with a conservative dad, and a liberal mother. I did find that interesting because in his personal life, it seems as if maybe he's willing to listen to two sides of the aisle, but he's so entrenched in Silicon Valley and the left-wing culture that, maybe for business, that's just kind of his default. He's like a lot of other people there. I don't know. He does come off more genuine and more realistic than, say, Mark Zuckerberg does. And I would say my biggest criticism of the Jack Dorsey interview I saw in terms of Jack's part was he really didn't seem to know what was going on within his own company at one point. Joe actually did not really confront him, but asked him about the censorship of conservative, and Jack seemed completely oblivious to it. Now, some people were saying that that Jack Dorsey was lying, that it was clear that you could see it. Well, I listened to the audio podcast, so I don't know about that. But, I mean, from what I heard, Jack just kind of seemed a little bit befuddled as to what was going on within his own company, and also pretty overwhelmed by what Twitter has become, which I can kind of blame him. I mean, I can't really blame him for that, because he did start Twitter off as a messaging service initially, just for instant messaging, and then it became this whole big news / social conversation aggregate. So all in all, I mean, I'm still digesting the whole interview. In the plus column, I would definitely have to say that I think it was good to hear Jack talk about the historical side of Twitter and kind of the company's history. By the same token, I pretty much have to agree with everyone else that I think Joe should have addressed the issue of censorship a little bit harder and maybe a little bit more. But at the same time, I mean, I'm not as outraged or upset with Rogan as some other people are, and I realize that the fact that I'm not mad may piss some people off, because I should be as pissed off as they are about this, but I'm not. Okay, I'm not. So, with all that being said, I certainly hope someone does give Dorsey a more thorough critique in a future interview, and I hope that Jack will maybe talk to someone more conservative in the future who actually will confront him on this issue. So, that's that. Alright, folks, we've been going for almost 40 minutes, so, and I mainly covered my 2/3 topics that I wanted to cover tonight on the podcast. Again, impromptu Monday podcast for you guys. So, anyway, thanks for tuning in to this surprise Monday podcast episode. I hope you enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you'd like to leave us a voice message, you can either do so by calling the number 941-564-5805 and leave us voicemail with your thoughts on either the Super Bowl or Jack Dorsey's Twitter interview with Joe Rogan and how you thought that went. Or you can also leave us a voice message via the Anchor app if you are using Anchor. So you can use that as well. You can follow me on Twitter at @samdib_NGC, Instagram at @samdib_NGC. Follow me on Gab at Sam Whitfield and of course, thesamwhitfield.com for all your needs relating to this podcast and my blog. All right, folks, I want to thank you very much for tuning into the podcast. From all of us here at NGC Media, good day or night, God bless, and God save this great nation. I'll see you on Thursday for another episode of the Whitfield Report. Hey there, folks. If you've made it this far to the end of the podcast, I'd like to thank you very much for listening to the show. You are the ones that make it possible for me to make an income from podcasting, and I greatly appreciate that just by listening to our show. You are helping us gain ad revenue. However, if you would really like to help support the show, I encourage you to please donate to the podcast and become a supporter of the show. You can head over to anchor.fm/Whitfield Report and click the support this podcast button and choose the amount that suits you to support the show. Or you can click the link in the show notes and it will directly take you to that page. If you can support the podcast, I really, really appreciate that. Anything that you can do to help out is greatly appreciated. Even if you can't afford to help financially support the podcast, I encourage you to please go on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or Stitcher and please leave this podcast a positive 5-star review. That really helps us out here at the Whitfield Report. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next episode.